You've probably heard before that in the midst of tragedy and trauma and disaster, our minds change. The parts of the brain that regulate emotions and fear start firing on all cylinders, while the parts of our brain that are responsible for memory and critical thinking, and even our sense of self, start to slow their functioning. The body struggles to self regulate, and so sleep becomes hard to come by, and calming yourself down feels impossible. And so a vicious cycle starts to establish itself. The cruel irony is that the very stuff that would lead to healing is what's taken away. Being able to grieve in community with other people, re-establishing a sense of safety, accessing memories and their contours, being able to fill in the details. So it's fitting that the details in today's gospel account in the midst of the trauma of the cross aren't so much fantastical as they are murky, undetailed. It begins with Jesus coming to the disciples in the locked upper room, but his appearance is anticlimactic. Without any explanation, it says, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." We can't help but speculate on what happened or didn't here, though explanations will fail us. Usually in religion, speculation is not to be encouraged because speculation quickly turns to fantasy. In the ancient world, fantasy was understood in a particular way. Reason was the highest good above all, and so fantasy was seen as its enemy, the part of our brains that works from whim rather than reason. But the problem in this passage of speculation isn't really that we should be impartial about these details. They won't let us do that. Now, the danger of speculation that turns to fantasy is this: that we come to imagine a world other than the one that we live in. Fantasy is the stuff of desire, and we can speculate on God just enough to turn God into an idol, and fantasize about other people enough to the point that they aren't real people anymore, just figments of our imagination. We can turn even this good news of the resurrection into a fantasy. Our desires for goodness can also turn into a fantasy of what will be. There are many gaps in this story, and so it's understandable that we would speculate, if not fantasize. But the gaps that are missing are the ones that seem to be most human. For a minute, we might even speculate. We could imagine that scene in the upper room before Jesus appeared. Now, the only detail we're given is that the doors were locked for fear of the Jews. And it doesn't tell us if this fear is justified, but probably not. What we don't hear is how these disciples got there after scattering on Good Friday. How did they find each other? Were they still paying for this upper room? Who was paying? Maybe the disciples were low on sleep and irritable. Maybe some of them sat in dumbfounded silence while others, probably Peter, worried aloud until the others had to tell him to just can it. Maybe old resentments flared up between them. Or maybe they all just sat with 1,000-yard stares. What did they eat? Did they sing? Did they weep? It doesn't tell us, because just as soon as we start speculating, Jesus appears. The fantastical appearance of Jesus shocked their already shocked minds. And if this is another disaster, it's a different kind of one, because the disciples are laid before him bare, before this one they have betrayed. But even though they have betrayed them, Christ meets them with tenderness, with intimacy. Reformer John Calvin writes that we shouldn't speculate too much, but it is worthy of notice how gently Christ acted toward them in not keeping them in suspense any longer. For though they are less courageous than they ought to have been, still they do not give way to their weakness. True, they seek concealment for the sake of avoiding danger, but they gather courage so as to remain together. Otherwise, they would have been scattered hither and thither, and no man would have ventured to look at his neighbor. In this mirage of shame and guilt, when their fantasies have been shattered, these disciples still gather together to look not at Jesus first, but each other, to grieve before they try to put the pieces of the puzzle back together. They've got the right idea here of what the church is to be, even without Jesus. But they are not left in this situation because this is not yet a church of resurrection. Even their wildest fantasies couldn't fill in those gaps in the details. Jesus breathes his Spirit upon them, and he gives them his peace. And without telling us how Jesus departs, even, just as quickly the story pans forward a few more days. We can't help but ask here either. We can't help but speculate. Where was Thomas this whole time? It doesn't say. Maybe he was just stepping out for a sec to grab a cup of coffee and catch his breath, the exasperation of the room. Maybe he was hiding out on his own. Maybe he was forgotten by the disciples, just didn't get the memo. Maybe he tried to return to his life as it was before this Jesus guy came around. Maybe he thought the disciples' fears were misplaced. Or maybe he fanatically, fantastically, in total denial of the reality of the situation, tried to keep the mission going in some way. After all, when the disciples wanted to stay clear of Judea, when Jesus wanted to go raise Lazarus from the dead, Thomas was the one who said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." But maybe his commitment only heightened his sense of betrayal that Jesus had left them, or his guilt at having betrayed Jesus on that fateful night. But how did he get back here? Were the apostles able to send word? Or maybe he just missed Jesus by a minute. It doesn't say. But we do get a glimpse of his attitude when they tell him that Jesus appeared. When they tell him, "We have seen the Lord," he replies, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." After all, Thomas isn't asking for something the disciples weren't already given. Maybe he doesn't trust them, and why would he after all that's happened? But what's striking here isn't that Thomas was some skeptic that was turned into a believer, or that his skepticism wasn't all that bad in the first place. These details aren't given to us for a reason. Because what's important in the sparse details, with their many gaps that were given, perhaps precisely within those gaps, we find that we are joined to this apostle. With him, we touch Jesus, our friend. We recognize him in intimacy, even if we have not seen him or known him in the flesh for ourselves. Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Right here, most of us Gentiles can find ourselves in the story. We find the early church writing to us, offering us a full sense of God's presence, even though we haven't seen this Jesus for ourselves in the flesh. And so this sets the stage for us Gentiles to be included in this sparse Jewish narrative, to begin to fill in the gaps. This is for everyone to experience, we're told, no matter what. In this story, it refers to Thomas as Didymus, the twin. It calls him one of the 12, and this is an interesting point because these apostles are no longer 12. Judas is missing. And in Christian tradition, it's often thought that Thomas, the twin's other twin here, is Judas. Thomas is standing in for even Judas. We could imagine Judas here in this moment too, despite all the betrayal, the distrust. Thomas here gets a glimpse of the forgiveness that Judas might have received if he was still there to look on his neighbors, despite all that he had done. The narrative ends just as soon as that, just as soon as we speculate and wonder. And it ends with an interesting footnote. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. This is our interpretive key to fill in the details so our speculations lead us to the right place. That in the lack of details in our own lives, we might find a still greater trust. Because it matters little for us how Jesus enters this room. That's for the disciples to know. But we're told that it happened. We're told that he appeared, flesh and blood, scars and all, back from the dead. In his letter, Peter gives us Gentiles a sense of what we're to make of this. Starting with belief, our belief turns to faith, and faith is a very act of God inside us. Even in our helplessness laid bare before God, God meets us with tenderness and intimacy of the greatest kind. And Peter, in describing this to an early Gentile church, describes their faith in an interesting way. He says, our inheritance is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. Our faith results in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Now, these are attributes and results that are usually reserved for God alone, but they are now ours in this narrative of salvation. The Spirit of God, who is truly God, is intimately joined to us just as Jesus was joined to his friends. We Gentiles, even us Gentiles, even those who have sinned greatly, those living with mistrust and fear and trauma, those especially, those in the gaps of our understanding, those who have not seen God for themselves, are passed down the very essence of God. And this is no impersonal thing. This is something we can touch as we gaze upon each other in the church. This kind of faith we're given goes deeper than speculation, and it satisfies us with joy even more than our most powerful fantasies could if they were fulfilled. So go out. You have been given the Spirit of Christ, a spirit of reconciliation in a world with limited mercy, a spirit of grounded reality and truth in a world that so long turns to speculation. You've been given a spirit of love in the midst of unbearable hatred. Go and be Christ's body in this world. Amen.